The debris field had no name in any official registry. That was the first thing Counselor Vethera noticed when she pulled the survey report. Not the debris itself, not the scale of it, but the absence of a designation. Someone had catalogued it. Someone had filed coordinates, estimated mass, noted orbital decay rates, and then, deliberately, left the name field blank. She almost moved past it. The debris field sat at the gravitational boundary of a yellow dwarf system on the outer rim of contested space. Unremarkable, except that the mass estimates in the report were wrong, not slightly wrong, not rounding error wrong, but wrong by a factor that implied something the size of 14 capital warships had simply ceased to exist there, and no one had submitted an incident report, and no species in the Interstellar Council had claimed responsibility, and the date on the original survey was 63 years old. She read the date twice. 63 years. And the field was blank. The chamber where the council convened was carved from the living rock of a moon that had been slowly cooling for 11,000 years. The architects had chosen it specifically because the temperature never changed, not by a single degree, not in 11 millennia, and the architects believed that decisions made in unchanging environments produced unchanged outcomes, which they considered a virtue. Most of the other species represented in the chamber considered this a mild form of madness but had never said so, because the architects had been building things for longer than most of their civilizations had been counting. Vethera was Kethsoran, which meant she had 4 bilateral sensory clusters and could process 17 distinct frequencies of light simultaneously, which meant she saw the chamber as most species never would, the ancient heat signatures still radiating faintly from the rock, the molecular composition of each counselor's breathing apparatus, the subtle structural fatigue in the ceiling that the architects, ironically, had never repaired. She set the report on the table. "I want to discuss the Earth exclusion zone," she said. The silence that followed was not the silence of surprise. It was the silence of something that had been agreed, quietly, not to be discussed. Counselor Drenvaz of the Hull Collective was the first to speak. He was enormous. Most Hull were a species built for deep ocean pressure, and his translator module hummed 3 full seconds before converting his resonant speech into something the room could process. "The exclusion zone is a navigational advisory," he said. "It has been a navigational advisory for 40 years. This does not require council discussion." "I know what it's classified as," Vethera said. "I want to know why." Another silence. "Because the system is inhabited," said Councillor Saristal, the Mira delegate, her voice careful and precise in the way of someone choosing every word. "By a pre-contact species. Standard protocol." "Standard protocol," Vethera repeated, "does not create debris fields." She slid the report across the table. No one reached for it. And that was mystery number 1. Not the debris, but the fact that no one in that room was surprised by it. The Council's official position on Earth was simple, documented, and, Vethera was increasingly certain, almost entirely fictional. The humans had been classified as a Category 3 civilization approximately 90 years ago, which in Council taxonomy meant spacefaring, pre-FTL, contained within their home system, not yet eligible for contact protocols. Category 3 civilizations were observed. They were studied. They were, in the bureaucratic language the Council preferred, monitored for developmental progress. They were not avoided. But every species with a presence in the sectors adjacent to the human system avoided it. Shipping lanes rerouted. Survey missions redirected. 3 separate commercial ventures had applied for resource extraction permits in the outer asteroid belt of the human system over the last 40 years. All 3 had been denied. The denial codes were identical across all 3 applications. Code 7 Sigma, which officially meant navigational hazard, pending resolution, and none of the applications had been reviewed since filing. Vethera had found all of this in 3 hours of archival work. She had been a counselor for 9 years and a researcher for 20 before that, and in that entire time she had never encountered a paper trail this thin over a question this large. Someone had been careful. Someone had been careful for a very long time. Mystery number 2, the humans were Category 3. They should have been unremarkable. Dozens of Category 3 civilizations existed throughout the galaxy. None of the others had an exclusion zone. "I want the full file," she said. "There is no full file," said Drenvas. "Then I want what exists." Saristal finally reached out and touched the debris report. Her fingers, delicate, four-jointed, designed by evolution for manipulation at microscopic scale, spread across the document without lifting it. "Counselor Vethera," she said very quietly, "there are things the Council has chosen not to formalize. 4 reasons that were considered sound at the time." "At what time?" The pause. 63 years ago, Saristal said. The archive room was 3 levels below the council chamber, and it was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Vethera had been granted provisional access, not full access, not council-level access, but the kind of access that meant someone above her had decided it was better for her to find some things than to keep asking questions that might require direct answers. She understood the distinction. She'd used it herself. The files were fragmented, deliberately, she suspected, though she couldn't prove it. Survey logs. Intercepted transmissions. Observation drone footage flagged with classification levels that didn't match any taxonomy she recognized. A document in the hull encoding system, partially translated, that appeared to be an after-action report for something called the Iridian approach, but the action itself was redacted, and the date was 63 years ago. And then, near the bottom of the provisional access folder, a single audio file. The metadata listed it as a communication log from an observation post that had been decommissioned 41 years ago. The post's designation was a string of coordinates. Its location, the outer edge of the human system. She played it. The audio was degraded, expected for its age, but clear enough. 2 voices. One she identified immediately as Keth Soren from the resonance patterns, one of her own species. The other she couldn't place at first, and then realized with a slow chill that it wasn't a council species at all. It was human. A human voice. Speaking in what her translator rendered haltingly, imprecisely as, "Tell them we know you're out there. Tell them we've known for a long time. And tell them, if you come in peace, come openly. Because we have been watching the perimeter, and we will not be surprised." The Keth Soren voice, the one she recognized as belonging to someone who should have been on a silent observation mission, responded, and what it said made Vethera sit very still. "I know," it said. That's why I called. She played it again. Mystery number 3, 41 years ago, someone from her species, on an officially classified silent observation post, had made contact with a Category 3 civilization. And no one had ever reported it. She spent 6 days in the archive. She did not sleep in the conventional sense. Keth Soren entered a maintenance state for approximately 90 minutes in every 30-hour cycle, which most other species found unsettling, but she did not leave the room. She ate from the provisions she'd brought, and she read, and she built a picture of something that had been assembled over decades specifically to resist being assembled. Here is what she found, piece by piece, in the order she found it. 41 years ago, an observation post crew, 4 species, 11 individuals, had broken contact protocol after detecting what the crew log called anomalous perimeter activity in the outer system. The activity was not weapons testing, not debris, not solar interference. The log described it, precisely as structured pattern. Non-random. Responsive. The humans had been watching the Watchers, and they had begun signaling back. The crew had panicked, understandably by any reasonable assessment. A pre-FTL species was not supposed to be able to detect deep space observation platforms. The platforms used absorption materials so effective they were undetectable by every sensor suite in the Council's catalog. The humans should not have known the post was there. But they had known, and they had found a way to communicate. The crew's decision, the decision that should have triggered an immediate report to the Council, was instead to respond, to assess, and to request guidance through a secondary channel that bypassed the standard log. Vethera couldn't find that guidance in any official document. She found the response to it, a single line in a Council operations file under a routing code that didn't match anything in the directory. Asterisk maintain silence. Do not escalate. Do not withdraw. Observe the development and report in 40 days. Asterisk. The report had never been submitted, because 38 days later, the Iridian approach had happened. She found the debris field report from a different angle now, not the survey document she'd brought to the council, but the original observation log, filed by a drone that had passed through the system 8 months after the Iridian approach and recorded what remained. The Iridian collective had been a mid-tier spacefaring species. Not aggressive by nature, but territorial in the way of species that had expanded quickly and then found their expansion stalled. 63 years ago, they had identified the human system as a candidate for what the council euphemistically called developmental influence, meaning they had decided the resource-rich inner planets of the human system were worth acquiring and that a pre-FTL species was an acceptable obstacle to work around. They had sent 14 ships. Not a fleet, by the standards of any major power. 14 ships, a mix of survey and light combat vessels, carrying extraction equipment and what the Iridian records described as first contact preparation teams. None of the 14 ships returned. The debris field had an estimated mass that matched, almost exactly, the mass of 14 mid-tier spacecraft. And the humans, officially, were Category 3. Pre-FTL, contained within their home system, being monitored for developmental progress. Vethera sat in the cold of the archive room, and for the first time in 9 years of council service, she felt something she could only describe as fear. "You should stop," said a voice from the doorway. She turned. The speaker was Keth Soren, her species, older than her by at least 40 years, wearing a council administrative designation she didn't recognize. Not a counselor. Not research staff. Something else. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name doesn't matter for this conversation," the figure said. He moved into the room with the careful deliberateness of someone who had spent a great deal of time in rooms where moving too quickly was inadvisable. "What matters is that I know what you found, and I know what you haven't found yet, and I'm asking you to stop. Because the things you haven't found yet are worse." She looked at him for a long moment. Worse than 14 ships disappearing? He didn't answer immediately. He crossed to the archive terminal, looked at the files she'd opened, and said, very quietly, the Iridians were not the first. His name, he eventually told her, was Solenketh. He had been, 41 years ago, one of the 11 crew members on the observation post. He was the one who had spoken to the human. He was the reason she was in this room, not because he'd engineered her finding the files, but because when her access request had come through, he had not blocked it, which was something he could have done, and had chosen not to. "Why?" she asked. "Because," he said, sitting across from her with the deliberate care of someone assembling something fragile, "I am old enough to know what happens when organizations decide they are better served by managing a secret than by understanding it. And I have been watching this particular secret metastasize for 40 years, and I believe it has now reached a size where managing it is no longer possible. Tell me about the Iridians." The Iridians were the third attempt. She absorbed this. Third. The first was a survey vessel, approximately 90 years ago. Single ship, small crew, academic mission. They entered the human system without clearance. This was before the exclusion zone, before the classification protocols. They intended to observe, collect samples from the outer belt, leave. He paused. They did not leave. What happened to them? We don't know. The ship's transponders stopped transmitting. Wreckage was found, eventually, by a hull patrol operating in the adjacent sector. The wreckage was, he seemed to search for the precise word, consistent with catastrophic structural failure. Weapons? Unknown. The debris pattern did not match any weapon signature in the council catalog. He looked at the table. The survey vessel had been carrying 6 crew members. The hull patrol found the wreckage of the ship. They found no bodies. None. None. He said it flatly. The second attempt was a consortium resupply convoy that took an unauthorized shortcut through the outer edge of the human system. 7 ships. Same result. 5 lost. 2 managed to achieve FTL exit and survived. The surviving captains filed reports. Those reports were classified within 72 hours, and both captains were transferred to postings in unrelated sectors and did not discuss the incident again. Vethera thought about the denial codes on the 3 resource extraction applications. Code 7 Sigma. Navigational hazard, pending resolution. The humans did this, she said. The humans did this, Solinketh confirmed. With technology that should not exist on a Category 3 civilization. With tactics that our analysts could not reconstruct from the evidence available. And this is the part that caused the original review committee to recommend a complete information suppression protocol, with what appeared to be foreknowledge of each approach. The archive room felt colder than it had before. They knew the ships were coming. Every time, Solinketh said, before any signal was transmitted that should have alerted them. Before any contact was made. The survey vessel, the convoy, the Iridians, in every documented case, the humans responded before the incursion was complete, before our sensor profiles suggested they should have detected anything. He opened his hands in a gesture of genuine uncertainty, one she recognized from her own species' body language as specific to problems that had resisted solution for a very long time. We have no explanation for this. You've been watching them. We never stopped watching them. We improved our concealment. We built new platforms using materials that were genuinely undetectable by any technology we believed existed in the galaxy. He paused. They found those too. How? We don't know. The platform crew, my crew on the post 41 years ago, we received the signal 18 hours after deployment. 18 hours. We were using absorption materials that had never been penetrated, not by any species at any technological level. The humans found us in 18 hours and sent a structured response. And they talked to you. She talked to me. One human. Young by their standards, I've since learned enough about their biology to estimate. She spoke in her own language, which our translator was not designed for, but she was patient. She repeated things. She helped the translator calibrate. He looked somewhere past Vethera. She said, we know this is strange. We know you must have questions. We have questions too. But if you are going to watch us, you should at least be honest about it. Come in openly, or tell us why you won't. We deserve that much. The silence afterward was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of something large being set down carefully. What did you say? Vethera asked. I said, I know. That's why I called. He met her eyes. And then my post commander ordered the channel closed, filed a partial report through the secondary routing, and received instructions to maintain position and observe. And 38 days later, the Iridians arrived, and we watched from the platform, and what we watched, what we recorded, is the third thing in those files that you have not yet found. She found it. It took her another 4 hours, but she found it. The observation log from the platform, the raw footage that had never been processed into a summary report, never been distilled into the sanitized language of official documentation. Just the raw sensor data, tagged with the platform's coordinates and timestamped across 48 hours 63 years ago. She watched the Iridian ships enter the system. She watched the humans respond. And then she understood why no one had ever submitted a formal report. Because what the humans did was not what a Category 3 civilization should have been able to do. They did not use weapons of any kind recognizable in the Council catalog. They did not communicate with the Iridian ships. There was no battle, not in any sense that the word implied, no exchange of fire, no tactical maneuvering, no visible conflict. The 14 Iridian ships simply stopped. Not powered down. Not destroyed. Stopped. All systems active, all drives functional, all communication arrays broadcasting, and then over the course of approximately 6 hours, one by one, they began to come apart. Not explosions. Not weapons impacts. The structural integrity of each vessel degraded, section by section, in a progression that her analyst's mind recognized as systematic. The sensor data showed nothing external causing it. No radiation source. No particle discharge. No physical contact. The ships fell apart from the inside. In the lower left corner of the sensor feed, barely within the platform's recording range, she could see a cluster of what the platform logs identified as unclassified human vehicles. Small, crude by any galactic standard, clearly not FTL capable, positioned at a distance from the Iridian formation that should have been too far for any known weapon to be effective. They stayed there for the full 6 hours. They did not move forward. They did not retreat. When the last Iridian ship had come apart, the human vehicles turned and moved back toward the inner system. Vethera watched the footage 3 times. On the third viewing, she noticed something she had missed before, a detail in the sensor log so small it had not flagged any of the platform's automated analysis systems. The human vehicles were broadcasting. Not to the Iridian ships. Not to the platform. Broadcasting on a frequency so far outside conventional communication bands that the platform's systems had logged it as background noise and moved on. She isolated the frequency. She ran it through the translator. It was music. Solonketh was still in the archive room when she came back to it. He had not left. She had the feeling he had been waiting, not with urgency but with the patience of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has finally found a place to set it. The broadcast, she said. He nodded once. It was music. It was music, he agreed. We spent 3 years trying to understand the tactical significance of that broadcast. Whether it was a communication to some additional element we'd missed. Whether it was a signal to activate some weapon system with an external trigger. Whether it was a psychological component of whatever they'd done to the Iridian ships. He was quiet for a moment. It was none of those things. Then what was it? I asked her, he said. The same human. I re-established the contact, alone, without informing my commander, which is why this part doesn't appear in any official record. I re-established the contact and I asked her directly. Vethera waited. She said, Asterisk, it's what we do when we have to do something terrible. We play something beautiful. So we don't forget what we're trying to protect. Asterisk, he paused. And then she said, Asterisk, we didn't want to kill them. We want you to know that. We tried for 6 weeks before they arrived to find a way to communicate with them, to warn them, to make them understand they didn't need to come here. They didn't respond to any signal we sent. We don't know if they couldn't receive our frequencies or if they chose not to. But they came anyway, and we had children here, and we couldn't let them come any farther. Asterisk, the room was very still. She knew you were watching, Vethera said. She knew we were watching, Solonketh said. She knew we had recorded everything. She knew that record would go somewhere, eventually. She was explaining herself, to us, to whoever we reported to whoever might one day review the footage. She wanted the record to show that they had tried to avoid it. He exhaled slowly. I asked her how they had destroyed the ships. She said, Asterisk, destroyed isn't the right word for what we did. We asked them to leave, very firmly, in the only language available to us at that range. They weren't able to leave. We regret that. Asterisk, that's not an answer. No, Solonketh said. It is not. And that is the part that has caused 40 years of institutional silence, counselor. Not the capability. We have faced species with extraordinary capabilities before, and we have understood them, eventually, even when we couldn't replicate them. It is the deliberate incompleteness of the answer. Every interaction with this species produces a deliberate incompleteness. He leaned forward slightly. They know what they are. They know we don't fully understand them. And they have consistently, across every documented contact, chosen to leave us room to be afraid. She brought it to the full council 3 weeks later. Not the sanitized version. Not a summary report. The raw files, the sensor footage, the audio recordings, the translated broadcast, all of it, arranged in chronological order and presented without editorial comment. She watched their faces, all 17 species represented around the stone table, every expression equivalent that 17 different biologies could produce, as the footage of the Iridian ships played. No one spoke for a long time after it ended. Then Drenvaz, the hull counselor, said, How many contacts have there been total? Documented? 11, Vethera said. 11 separate incidents across 90 years, ranging from single survey vessels to the Iridian incursion. Every incident resulted in the loss of the entering vessels. No human casualties have ever been confirmed in any incident, not because we believe there were none, but because we have never been able to assess their losses. And they've never initiated contact? Never sent vessels beyond their system. Never in any documented case. She paused. They have sent signals periodically. Broad-frequency transmissions, clearly intended for reception by anyone in range. Music, mostly. Mathematical sequences. What our linguists have identified as literature, narratives, poetry, historical records. In at least 6 of the 11 incidents, the human vessels that responded to incursions were broadcasting one of these transmissions at the time of the engagement. She looked around the table. We believe this is intentional. We believe they want their nature to be understood before their capability. Why? Asked Saristal, and the question sounded genuinely uncertain, not political uncertainty, but the uncertainty of someone who has encountered a logic they cannot map. Because, Vethera said, I think they are afraid of what they are too. She had not shared everything. She had shared everything in the files. But 3 days before the council presentation, Solenketh had told her one more thing. A thing that wasn't in any file, that existed only in his memory and hers. In his last contact with the human 41 years ago, after she had explained the music, after she had said they regretted what they had done to the Iridians, he had asked one more question, the one that had been driving him for 40 years without resolution. He had asked, what are you exactly? What should I tell them you are? And she had been quiet for so long he thought the connection had failed. And then she had said, slowly, in the way of someone translating not from one language to another but from one entire framework of existence to another. We are the ones who decided that the worst possible thing was to stop trying. Everything we've ever built, every war we've ever fought, every star we've ever looked at and imagined reaching, it all comes from the same place. We don't know how to give up. We've tried, sometimes. Individually, as a species, we've tried. But something in us won't hold. The giving up breaks first. Another pause. That's probably frightening from the outside. He had said, without fully understanding why. Yes. Good, she had said. You should know that, going in. It's the most honest thing I can tell you about us. The council voted. The vote was not close, and not because the councillors agreed on what the humans were or what their presence in the galaxy meant. They did not agree. They argued, across 7 sessions over 3 weeks, in ways that Vethera had never heard council members argue. Not the managed disagreement of political process, but something raw, something that occasionally slipped the translation filters and came through as what she recognized, from her own experience of the footage, as fear. They voted to maintain the exclusion zone. They voted to increase the observation parameters. They voted to formally classify the 11 incidents at the highest suppression level the council's protocols allowed, which meant that the only people who would ever know the full scope of what had happened were in this room, and Solenketh, and the human woman whose name Vethera had never learned. And then Drenvaz, as the vote concluded, said something that no one disputed and no one put in the official record. We are the most advanced collective in the catalogued galaxy, he said. 11 species here have achieved FTL. 7 have weapons platforms capable of sterilizing a planetary surface. We have technologies those humans cannot imagine. He looked at the table, and his enormous frame, built for depths no surface creature could survive, seemed to settle under some weight that was not physical. And not one of us, in this room, has been willing to fly into that system for 40 years. We built an exclusion zone and called it a navigational advisory and agreed, quietly, not to discuss it. We looked at those 14 ships dissolving on a sensor feed and we said nothing, formally, to anyone. He raised his eyes. What does that tell you about us? And what does it tell you about them? No one answered. Some questions, Vethera thought, were not asked in order to receive answers. Some questions were asked because the act of asking them was the only honest thing remaining to do. She filed her report. She went home. She sat, for a long time, in the particular quality of dark that her species preferred, and she thought about music played in the moment before something terrible. She thought about a young woman on a small planet who had looked up at the stars and decided that whatever was out there deserved the truth about what it was looking at. She thought about 11 ships that had come with survey equipment and extraction tools and first contact preparation teams and had come apart from the inside, and about the human vehicles playing music at a distance while it happened, and about how the human woman had said we regret that and meant it. She thought about what it meant to be a species that had decided, somewhere in its ancient and improbable history, that the worst possible thing was to stop trying. That produced children who looked at unanswerable problems and called them interesting. That had been found, alone in their small system, by the vast machinery of galactic civilization, and had looked back without flinching and said, "Come in openly or tell us why you won't." She thought about the exclusion zone, which was real, and the navigational advisory, which was fiction, and the council vote, which was fear dressed in the language of protocol. And she thought about Solenketh, who had been carrying this for 40 years, who had chosen not to block her access request, who had sat in a cold room and told her things that no official document could contain. She called him. When he answered, she said, "Do you think they'll ever come out? Beyond their system?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "When?" "When they're ready," he said. "When they've decided the rest of the galaxy deserves to know them. On their terms, in their own time, with music playing." She thought about the debris fields. She thought about the empty name fields in the survey reports. She thought about Code 7 Sigma, navigational hazard, pending resolution, and how the pending resolution had been pending for 40 years and would go on pending, she now understood, until the humans decided otherwise. "Are we ready?" she asked. "For that?" Solenketh made a sound she recognized as her species' closest equivalent to a smile that had learned something painful. "No," he said. "But I don't think it matters whether we are. I think readiness is a concept that exists inside boundaries the humans have decided not to recognize." The darkness in her room was very complete. "She told you something else," Vethera said. "At the end. Something you didn't tell me." A pause that lasted long enough to confirm it. "What did she say?" She said, "He stopped. Started again." She said, "At the very end, just before I close the channel, tell whoever you report, tell them we're not trying to be frightening. We're just trying to be alive. But we know those look the same from far enough away. We know. We're sorry." Vethera sat with that for a long time. A species that could unmake 14 warships in 6 hours, that could find undetectable platforms in 18 hours, that had never in 90 years of unprovoked contact ever sent a single vessel across their own system boundary in aggression, that had, instead, sent music and mathematics and literature and apologies, that had decided the worst possible thing was to stop trying, that had been trying all this time, not toward conquest, not toward expansion, but toward something the Council's entire taxonomic framework had no category for. They were trying to be known, not feared, not dominant, no. And the galaxy, in its wisdom and its terror, had looked at everything they were and everything they were capable of and had built an exclusion zone around them and called it a navigational advisory, because the only other option was to admit what the debris fields already said plainly. That somewhere in the vast catalog of civilizations that had risen and fallen and risen again across 11,000 years of recorded galactic history, something had appeared in a small system around an ordinary yellow star that none of the frameworks quite fit, that violated the expected progressions, that did not become dangerous the way dangerous things were supposed to become dangerous, slowly, predictably, in ways that could be mapped and managed and ultimately controlled. They had become something else. Something that sent music into the dark and waited, patiently, for the dark to answer. Something the Council had decided, unanimously and in secret, was best left waiting. Something that Vethera now understood with a certainty that settled into her like the cold of that archive room, was not waiting because it had been contained. It was waiting because it had chosen to. And that was the only fact about humanity that mattered. That was the fact that made the exclusion zone real and the navigational advisory fictional, and the Council's silence not cowardice but the first genuinely rational response an advanced civilization had ever produced in the presence of something it could not, after 90 years and 11 incidents and all the careful fragmented files in all the suppressed archives, fully understand. They were not the most powerful species in the galaxy. They were the species that had decided, long before the galaxy noticed them, that power was not the point. And the galaxy, looking at the debris fields and the music and the apologies, had no idea what to do with that.